Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Next Play podcast. This is our second opportunity to bring some more basketball talk from this past week, some things that we've been thinking about as it pertains to college basketball in the moment. And we're going to focus in on another program like we did last week, which was St. Bonaventure. We'll bring a new one to the table today and bring everyone up to speed a little bit on a couple things. But I thought that as we get started here today, let's take a look back at a couple topics that a lot of questions have come our way. I think one question is for two coaches who have coached good point guards, played point guard. In particular, when you talk about one of the best in college basketball right now, which is Andre Curbelo, had a tough night at Marquette. You're on the road. You're in a new role. You're missing arguably college basketball's premier front court presence. He's a big part of how they play. But for Andre Curbelo to go into that game and pull that thing out for Illinois, he had to adjust at some point in that game of not trying to overdo it. And I think, a couple questions have come to us. What do you do when you have a guy in a new spot, new role, trying to do too much? He's a good player. You need him. And at the end of the day, how do you massage that during the game to try and get him in the best position to finish at some point? And he's going to have a lot better games than he did the other night. But clearly Marquette, their pressure, the way that they approached him in general, I thought, really enabled them to be in the game and have a chance to win. So from your standpoint, coaching a great point guard, a guy's struggling. What are you going to try to do for him during the game? And in particular, maybe some adjustments that are probably going to need to be made here early on his behalf.
Yeah, Arch, I think one thing, and I go back to even when I was a player, I think everybody, especially fans in general, have to be patient with the team, with the coach, with the players in the month of November. It's just, especially in this group, coming off of a unique summer, last year playing in front of no people. If they're a freshman right now in college, they're a young point guard, right? Young, really good player. A year ago as a senior in high school, they played in front of no fans. You think about the pressure on the best, the pressure on a good player, a freshman, a point guard like you're mentioning. Look, in the month of November, if you judge Texas, for example, who played Gonzaga, on how they looked in Spokane the other day as a team, it's just unfair. Too many new faces, really hard game. Let's take a look at who they are in February and March. So I think the first things first, you can't panic. Whether you're the player like Andre, who maybe didn't play his best, you can't panic. Nobody can panic. We're just getting started. I'm telling you, sometimes as a coach, you don't really have everything in rhythm for your team until Christmas, until the beginning of January. And those teams that have the rhythm going right now, they're teams with returning players that had the same role a year earlier. So I think every situation is different, Arch. Like, you could check back with Andre here in December and say he just had the best month of December as any point guard has had in college basketball. I'd say that's number one. And number two for me would simply be, it's the name of our podcast, Next Play. Right. Like, what makes a great player, great quarterback, a great point guard is you can forget and learn from a bad game, fix it, and come back to the next game and be yourself. So let's not panic. We're just getting started. Number two, let's have that next play mentality. Next play mentality is also learning from a game, forgetting about the things that happened in the game to some degree, and moving on to the next one, because that's the thing about college basketball. That next game, man, it's on you quick.
Yeah, no question. And I think probably reality sets in a year ago in those situations in the last 8 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes. They had the best closer in college basketball, and Io DeSumo. He's now playing for the Bulls.
That's right.
And when you put the ball in his hands, he 90% of the time made a good decision, a good play. Illinois usually came out on top when that happened. Now that he's in that situation, he's going to have to be able to adjust to the coverages during the game. He's going to have to adjust to his personnel. And that's part of what you said. I wouldn't be surprised if the next game for him isn't probably one of his more spectacular, because to his credit, he is a fearless player. And I know Coach Underwood in general is going to have those guys, adjust. Once they get Kofi back, things will change a little bit for him. But I remember having some really poor games. And the only thing that's at some point in time, that game you hope goes right, is that a coach or a player on your team taps you on the butt and says, don't worry about it, keep going. So
Yeah.
I think that's the route they'll go.
And Arch, I think that's why having a great staff is so important. As the head coach, you're aware of everything, but there's so many things on your plate going from one game to the next. You're in charge of the whole. The parts, making sure a guy's confidence going from a tough loss at Marquette to the next game, it falls on your staff a lot. And trust me, I'm sure that the staff has done a little bit of everything with Andre. Hey, let's look at the things that we can get from this Marquette game that you can learn from and grow. And then, by the way, here's a few things that, look, it just happened. The other point about all this, in 87 and 88, when at that point you would have been about 8 years old, I went to Pitt as a freshman, right? And I joined a preseason top 5 team. We had Charles Smith, Jerome Lane, Demetrius Gore, and I came in with the #1 recruiting class in America. Right? Cal Perry was on our staff as the assistant. Paul Evans was the head coach. And I'll never forget, almost feeling like even at Christmas in early January, as Big East play was beginning, God, this is a lot easier than I thought. And one of the reasons it was so easy is literally they were daring me to shoot. They were so worried about the studs, especially the bigs, Jerome Lane, nation's leading rebounder, Charles Smith, maybe the player of the year in college basketball, that if I beat them, that was like, hey, the freshmen beat us. November the next year, sophomore. We were playing athletes in action. Rod Foster, Lorenzo Romar were playing. And this is like exhibition season. And I remember thinking God, this is a lot different because of the guys I'm playing with. Trust me, big fella Kofi, when you're his teammate and he's in the game, the attention he gets, the things that you're able to get away with playing with him as your teammate, when you take him off the court, it's a different game for everybody. And that's
Right.
The other thing, in fairness to Illinois and Andre, when the big fella comes back, a lot of things will be easier, especially for the point guard.
Yep. Second part of this past few days and week has been what's been the most impressive win. And I think I would agree with you that I think Florida had an incredible win against Florida State at home. There was a lot on that game. They hadn't beaten them in a couple of years. Bouncing back after last season, they had a lot of COVID issues. Keontae actually goes down. To me, they had a great win. Gonzaga, obviously, over Texas was a great game, UCLA. But the other night when Seton Hall won in Ann Arbor, I think it put everybody on notice. One, Big East is going to be really difficult this year. A lot of good teams. And two, I think it brought up Seton Hall in front and center of being a little bit under the radar, underrated in terms of how good they've been and how good they are right now. That was an incredible win, 50-50 game, grinded it out. But Kevin has done that year in and year out now for quite some time, and they just fit the mold. He's got a great feel. They have a very difficult style of play to go up against, can beat you in a number of ways. But I would say that watching college basketball go right now, without question, Seton Hall to me had one of the best wins you're gonna get in non-conference this year.
Yeah, I've known Kevin since he was in college, and obviously he comes from a unique coaching background with his dad, who was a great coach. And then he worked with Coach Pitino, both in the NBA and at Louisville. And if you watch UCLA play with Mick Cronin as their coach, and you watch Seton Hall play with Kevin Willard as their coach, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
They remind me of each other in the way they've recruited, how they play defense, how they play offense. But in a quiet way, nationally, maybe not so much in the Big East, but nationally, has there been a coach that's done a better job running a program, turning a program around and winning like Kevin Willard has done at Seton Hall, Arch? He's done it, and that's a tough place. PJ Carlissimo, again, back in the days of the old Big East, that when I played, that was when, they were in the Final Four and playing ironically, Michigan in the national championship game. And I remember that team like yesterday, but it was always tough, man. And a lot of New Jersey guys on the team. And then when that crew left, it was Terry DeHare, Jerry Walker, Andrew Gaze was a part of things. PJ did a great job, but Kevin Willard is now almost becoming PJ. And I mean that in the most complimentary way that I can. But winning on the road at Michigan, and credit Juwan Howard. The reason why everybody's talking about that game, it's what Michigan has become.
Right.
I thought Seton Hall hung in there. They had a toughness about them in the second half. They could have very easily just said, not tonight, left with a hard-fought loss, moved on to the next game. But the will of their players, the will of their team, making big plays, playing all the way to the final buzzer, that's a win they'll call on quite a bit during the year. And I think it's easy to say we look at Seton Hall as an NCAA tournament team right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, you know, when you have a great program, a couple things are usually in place. In college basketball right now, the turnover of your roster is hard to deal with. Sometimes it's 4 and 5 guys, and Seton Hall's no different. They have a lot of new guys. But I look at Roden, I look at Kale, in particular, as guys that have been at Seton Hall for a while. And to me, they embody that edge that they play with. They get that Big East feel to them. And they're going to be a tough out. Never talk to a coach in the Big East who doesn't rave about Seton Hall and how hard they are to play against. So to me, Seton Hall checked the box. They're going to have one of the best wins in college basketball this year. When it gets late in the year, you're going to zero in on that road win right there as being one of the reasons that seeding is in place, getting in the tournament is in place, etc. Feast week. It's always, I think, it's sort of like everyone is home for the holidays. Basketball is on every hour of the day. Everyone is enjoying family time. We have been a part of all of those events throughout the course of time. And it never felt that holiday spirit for me when we were landing with 30 people, getting ready to do 3 games in 3 days, 3 games in 4 days. You're on the road for a 6 or 7 day run.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in a really nice place like a Maui. We actually went to Maui, Asheville last year. So we were wearing shorts outside in the snow. Bill Walton was supposed to be there covering our games. I was excited about being in Maui with him. Unfortunately, he was on a computer in California while we were in Asheville. So we didn't get to enjoy Maui last year. But number one, the tournaments is a great test opportunity for your team. Depending on the field, got a chance to play incredible opponents. There's no time to really react or rest. You got to get these guys ready to go after a win, after a loss. Your coaching staff spends countless hours preparing for the games. It's not all as fun and glamorous as when you turn on the television, you see the games in Orlando and you're like, man, that'd be a heck of a trip to go on and play. It's actually quite the opposite when you're in the heat of the battle.
Yeah.
But the tournaments play a big role for your team coming out of them, development, getting ready for conference play. And then you're going to have an opportunity a lot of times to play marquee non-conference games, although neutral, very important down the road.
Yeah. I mean, Arch, you call me crazy, but Thanksgiving, you walk in and boy, you could really care less. You try to fake it. You try to say, hey, everybody, kumbaya, who's cutting the turkey? You want pumpkin pie or pecan pie? How about some gravy on that stuff?
There's been a few years where the spread was never touched. No player, no coach, no one ate the entire table.
Right. And if you think that's a sick way of living, any coach that's listening to me talk right now, they're laughing because one thing college basketball got completely wrong. You're screwed up on every holiday. Let's start at Thanksgiving. You're in a tournament. You're somewhere. As much as you love everyone in the room, you're like, God, we have to win, shoot around. Are they going to be mentally prepared and locked in? Then you get to Christmas, and whether you're on a break or in a tournament, the only thing you're worried is everybody going to come back? When's the plane coming back? What do I do if he's late? How about this? Then you go to Easter, and you're like, we're recruiting somewhere. 4th of July, fireworks. When are we leaving to go to the Peach Jam? It's amazing how it just takes over
college
your life,
football.
For sure.
College football coaches.
They're so much smarter. They're their calendar. They actually have a part of their calendar that says, if you're the head coach, you're not allowed to do something for like a couple of weeks, which I find that one an amazing rule. Anyway, to your point, Arch, and here's the thing, I'm going to keep repeating this because if there's one thing that I really believe in at this time of year on this podcast is for the narrative to be about college basketball, that the November and December games are meaningless, are tune-ups. You're out to lunch. You're not getting it right. These games where your conference is playing other conferences, and as you just mentioned, you're playing on a neutral court now, where you might play 3 games in 3 days against the other big conferences or a top 25 opponent on a neutral court. Those will be the games looked at as much as any you play all year when it comes time to be selected in this year's NCAA tournament. So if you're going to Vegas to be a part of the Maui Invitational and you're Randy Bennett at St. Mary's and you have a chance to play Notre Dame, if you win Oregon and maybe a team like Houston, 3 games in 3 days like that, those might be the 3 biggest games other than Gonzaga they play all year. Yeah. But guess what? What time of year are they playing them? November. So that's what's hard. And I know we're going to get to this about some of these incoming freshmen. And you even hit on it about a point guard struggling early in the season, right? Like Andre at Marquette. It's like a gift and the curse. The gift is these are meaningful games. We get to play them. The curse is it's tough to have a team ready-made for those times. Yeah. So you're trying to develop your team. You're doing the best that you can. And at the same time, these games mean a lot. And again, that's why your college coach at Thanksgiving, is he a little stressed out? No doubt. That's why this year when we're cutting the turkey, it's going to be a lot different for you and I.
I'll never forget one Thanksgiving. I was an assistant at Ohio State. Thad Matta was the coach. Evan Turner, John Diebler, and those guys, and hopefully they'll remember this. But Thanksgiving Day practice is always, some guys are sentimental. They want to go home. Some guys don't care. The coaching staff in general has families, sometimes young kids. So the practice is always one of those ones you want to go well as the coaching staff, because you're probably going to play a day after, whatever. But that day didn't go well. And that was probably one of the worst practices that team had. And I remember exiting the practice facility and Coach Mata was saying, Thanksgiving at my house, 4 or 5 o'clock. And he walked out and he ate upstairs for 2.5 hours. And the team was in the basement for the other 2.5 hours. No one said hello or goodbye.
Yeah, it's awkward.
And then we rolled back in the next day like nothing happened.
Right.
Things like that. 2 things out of exempt events that I always felt was important. One, Mark Few, who's had great success, obviously, at a lot of these. We played them in Maui in 2014 in the opening night game at Dayton. We beat them. And I'll never forget.
Good win.
It was a great win, for our team that year. That team had a great season, but that was a big win on a great stage. Mm-hmm. And one, I remember the confidence almost being similar to an NCAA tournament round game. You won the round, you beat Gonzaga. Now you get to go play Baylor. This is great. But I remember listening to him after the loss in his press conference saying it's going to be very important that we don't lose to Dayton twice. Meaning I got about 8 hours before I take the floor and play Arkansas. Mm-hmm. If we don't get our stuff together in the next 8 hours, we're going to be even more miserable because we're not going to be ready to play. And I've always kind of taken that after a hard loss. Or one maybe you should have had. You got to move on.
Right.
Quickly.
To your point, as much as you have the euphoric feeling of winning that first game and getting ready to play for the second, equally quick turnaround, there's almost no better feeling than losing a tough one in that type of exempt tournament. Having your managers, your staff, your players on edge, you're on edge as the coach. You prepare, you get ready the next day, and you win.
Yeah,
like you proved, like you passed that test, and it's a tough one because not only are you down in the dumps, but like you said, Arch, that second. How about this? The third game. That third game is on you.
That's what happened to us. We would beat Gonzaga and played Baylor in the second game. Really good team at Baylor. I think we were up 16 with 6 to go to the championship game in Maui, and we lost the game.
Yeah.
I mean, we went from like great exhilaration to great, just angst. And then we turned around and played the first game of the third day against Cal, Mike Montgomery.
Yeah.
It was just like, boom. And
Great coach.
The last thing I would say about an exempt event for all these teams, regardless of how you do, coming out of them is another strategy. When do you play?
How do you practice?
How do you practice?
Yeah.
We just played 3 games in 3 days. We've been on the road for 7 out of 8. We
Yeah.
play in 3. That balance of coming home off of the trip,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a deep trip like a Maui,
Yeah.
or you're a West Coast team playing in Orlando, you got to go all the way back home. And I juggled that and say, we need rest.
Right.
But I felt like when we had rest at times, that week was such a letdown coming off the games that it was a tough week of practice. And Brad Stevens, I think he may have been the first guy to say, we wanted to try and play right away when we got back, get ourselves a situation. We have to get back and get focused in. There's not a whole lot of time to think about what just went on. I don't know your philosophy, but I always thought returning off these exempt events, man, it's tricky.
Playing 3 games in 3 days is very hard. I think the tournaments, I feel like I've coached in almost all of them, whether it be the San Juan shootout a long time ago, preseason NIT, Maui Invitational 3 times. We played in just about all of those and experienced winning those tournaments and sometimes not winning those tournaments. But 3 games in 3 days, I liked it much better when you played 2 games in a row. Everybody in the tournament takes a day off of recovery. And then you really have a chance to be the most ready mentally and physically for the 3rd day. But what you worry about is injuries. If you can get through that unscathed, which is hard, when you come back, I thought number 1 is let's let everybody catch their breath, get used to being back at home. Let's be smart with our practices. Let's give ourselves a little bit more time for the next game. And then you're right. When that next game came, I don't care what team you had, it always felt funny because playing at that exempt event, so much shine on your team, 3 games in 3 days, you come back just to play a non-conference game at home. It wasn't as big. But it's an awkward time for sure between handling the holidays. By the way, you didn't even talk about that a lot of universities are coming down the home stretch of their semester. So the other part our guys are going through is the home stretch academically with, tests that haven't come yet, final papers. You have to do your assignments while you're away. You have to, make sure you check in with who you're supposed to. They have that going as well. It's a very, very unique time at this holiday Thanksgiving time.
Yeah, ACC and Big Ten even have a double trouble because when you leave Wisconsin or Notre Dame leaves Maui, they head right into the ACC Big Ten Challenge on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. So you could play 3 games in 3 days, come travel Thanksgiving, and realistically, within maybe 72 hours, you're on the road at Florida State. So, or Florida State's on the road to Wisconsin, So coming out of those things, tough. Question being asked the other day, why won't people play more non-conference home and homes? They're so good for the fans. They're so fun. At the end of the day, if you have to flip the seat and say, what's the best for your team? It's very difficult to schedule all those games.
It is. I mean, just start with that conferences for the first time in the history of college basketball are playing 20 games.
20,
not 18. At one point, it was 16.
Yep.
It quietly went from 16 to 18 to now 20. You throw in one exempt tournament, right?
One challenge.
And then if you're in the Big East or Big Ten and you're playing the Big Ten ACC Challenge, playing in the Big East Big Ten Challenge, at some point you have to have games where, those guys we're talking about, the freshmen that will be really good in February that you're working through right now in November. Some of these in-between games are paramount to their confidence, their development, and that's why a balanced schedule is always the best. And if you look at Gonzaga, they play a very tough non-conference schedule because their conference isn't as tough as the Power 5. I think they'll admit that.
Good this year.
Yeah. But they always mix in a balanced schedule. They'll mix in a few, and during those few, a lot of their younger players, in my opinion, gained a lot of confidence. Arch, let's take a break.
Yep.
Before we move on, let me tell you guys a little bit about our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up for Bet Rivers yet, now is the time because they are offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart is that they require just one playthrough to turn your bonus into cash money. With their Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawing your winnings is safer It's more secure and it's more reliable. Now that basketball season is tipping off, get in on the action at betrivers.com today or by downloading the BetRivers iOS app. You must be 21 years or older. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And while I got you here, let's talk about the Field of 68 Media Network, where college basketball matters most all year round. This is a digital media and podcast network that we've been building over the course of the last year. We have shows hosted by some of your favorite players covering the program that they love the most. AJ Guyton hosts the House of Hoosier. Eric Devendorf covers Syracuse on the scorer's table. Dan Dickow hosts the Gonzaga Bulldog broadcast. We have Florida's Patrick Young and Duke's Andre Dawkins and North Carolina's Shammond Williams and Michigan's Stu Douglas and Illinois' Deion Thomas. The list goes on and on and on. We have more than 30 shows right now. So hit the links below and check them all out. And while you're at it, make sure that you go check out the Field of 12 Media Network, your home for college football.
You know, all the exempt events and all these big games, you know, have run into Gonzaga over a number of years, previous teams. And, you know, last year's team was incredible. A couple of years ago was incredible before the tournament got shut down. They've been on that route to the national championship, you know, games. But about the current team, you know, I think, you know, you in particular have really laughed about the talk surrounding their new players. Chet Holmgren, number 1 pick, and you won't deviate from the performance that Drew Timme had the other night. Was, you know, it was eye-opening about how good he was. But I think your point being is you weren't paying attention last year, were you? Because he was the best offensive player in Ken Palm a year ago on the best team. Why is that going to change this year? And how will that impact the rest of these young guys, in particular a guy like Chet or some of those young guys that are playing with him? But let's talk about Gonzaga. And I think moving forward, how good is Drew Timme?
So Duke at its finest, maybe ever. They had Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley was their point guard, Grant Hill, and they won back-to-back national championships. And that's before guys were really leaving as freshmen for the NBA. I mean, you know, those guys are sophomores and juniors. College basketball is a very talented field. And Christian Laettner was the best on a team that had a lot of greatness. Tyler Hansbrough at Carolina, same thing. As they moved through to national championship, Final Fours, ACC championships under Roy Williams, you know, it was easy to really look and say, look at what he's doing statistically. Drew Timme is not only those two guys equal, because Gonzaga from wire to wire last year, they were the best team in the country, them and Baylor. You know, they ended up, 30-something and 1, losing to Baylor in the national championship. So you can't say they didn't win or he didn't play with other great players. He did. Arch, his stats are sick. And here I am, you know, I'm watching the next year. He's only a junior, early in his junior year, against Texas. It's one of the marquee games of the early season. Mm-hmm. Texas at Gonzaga. It's what people want. How about instead of the neutral setting, let's go home and away. So Texas goes in there, and they're a work in progress, clearly. But Gonzaga as a team shoots 54%. They go 15 of 17 from the line, 7 of 19 from 3. How about this? Play the entire 40 minutes as a team with 6 turnovers. Drew Timme in that same game, he had 37 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. Arch, he was 15 of 19 from the field. And, you know, as I watched the game, a huge narrative is, what about Chet Holmgren? That someday Chet will look back at that game and laugh. He played 9 minutes and scored 2 points. Chet, that is not a knock on Chet Holmgren. You can't judge a player or a team in the month of November. We just talked about it. Mm-hmm. But you also have to see it for what it is. And the credit needs to go to the actual players and teams that are winning. What is it that separates Gonzaga? In my mind, a big separation is just how great of a college player Drew Timme is. And, you know, I talked to Mark Few, and I consider him a coaching friend. I also think he's one of the greats in our game, period. Whether it be an NBA coach or college basketball coach, he's right up top. But just kind of listening to him describe Timme and just watching how creative they are at getting him the ball. I don't think there is a player in the country that's better. There's not a player in the country who means more to their team. And I would say this, he might have been that same guy a year ago as a sophomore. Again, you said it. At the end of the college basketball season, who is the most efficient, productive offensive player who played college basketball? Drew Timme. That same guy just did what I described against Texas, who's a formidable opponent. Trust me, Chris Beard, he had a number of conversations after that game about in the future when Drew Timme, who's from the state of Texas, is popping up. We got to get him. We don't ever want to play against that guy from the state of Texas. But I think that I don't look at it as a negative spin towards Chet, because as you keep watching Chet Holmgren and he practices more, practice is important, plays in more games, learns through film and learns from trial and error of what he can and can't do, gets used to playing in a new system with college players, he'll become a great player. But don't put the spotlight only on what he's doing when you have not only a great team that he's playing with, but you have a great player on your team. I think almost ditto for Peyton Watson, Arch. Peyton Watson, the freshman at UCLA. The gift for Chet Holmgren and Peyton Watson, they're on a team that's primed to win the national championship. The negative towards them early on is they're going to have to maybe work into the rotation, and their best days are going to be in January and February. Part of why they're not getting the shine right now in November is they're on a really, really good team. They're just a small part to a bigger puzzle.
Right. And, the tough part is for all coaches, especially when you're dealing with talented players that you recruited, it's that balance of, getting them better, not allowing them to get frustrated when you turn on the television and another of your, peers, Amoni Bates, Jalen Durant, you see those guys playing more minutes. Right. Maybe they're not on as good of a team, and sometimes that works against you as the coach as well. You're trying to, move forward. But as I watched UCLA the other night play, and Peyton Watson played sparingly, he had some spot minutes at the end. I think he'll keep getting better as
he's
he
goes,
just better. Because Mick values some of the things that he does, and he's playing arguably with 3 or 4 of the best offensive players in college basketball. And then Chet, I think, is going to have to adjust a little bit because Timme is so good. How's he going to play against smaller players on both ends of the floor? It's adjustment for a guy that's 7 foot plus. Second thing is, what can he do to take Gonzaga over the top that they may not have once had? I've thought that, a la Anthony Davis plays at Kentucky, an amazing team of 10 to 12 guys. He averaged 12 points. I think he was the National Defensive Player of the Year, though. Maybe Chet can start to, go into that route with the shot blocking. But there's no question that I watched Luka Garza play in his last 2 seasons at Iowa. I believed he was the National Player of the Year as a junior. Obi Toppin won it partly because of what you said, team success, individuals. Dayton had the historic season. Yeah. But Luka Garza's numbers offensively as a junior were incredible. Incredible. He averaged about 24 a game. As a senior, he did it again. And he won, parade, the Wooden Award and all that stuff. But I think Drew Timme's on pace right now to probably shatter. He's going to shatter some individual records this year with the way that they play.
Arch, with team success comes all the individual accolades.
Yeah, no question.
Those young, talented freshmen, you can't judge them by how they play in November. But when you get to March Madness and the team they're on is playing in the NCAA tournament, advancing towards a Final Four, they'll really understand then what a great decision they made to join a program and a team that's ready-made. And look, at the end of the day, the players and the coaches and the teams that get the most credit are those that win. Sometimes, at Arizona, when you get in the top 25 and you've been in the top 25 for multiple years, our guys would leave the locker room and go back to their places they live. And I know what they were doing. They're looking at their phone and they're watching Sports Center. They're watching TV for their highlights. You always get the highlights when you're top 25. Then all of a sudden, like, you lose a couple when you're outside the top 25. I'd sometimes say to them, hey, look, be careful watching the highlights tonight. You could be disappointed. You're not going to show any. You know why? Because we're no longer ranked as a team. Right. With team success comes the individual accolades. whether you end up averaging 12.8 points a game or 18.2 points a game, it's so much about winning. It's so much about being a winning player. And I think as a coach and a staff, working so hard to block out the noise that can sometimes get involved with your team's success. It could be something innocent that somebody says, in a chat. It could be something they watch on TV. It could be something a family member says to them, but there's so much interference around your team that the awareness of it, having a great staff that can handle it, that's part of being a team and developing your team, getting through those moments. I mean, think about it. Chet Holmgren is going to be a lottery pick. Maybe he'll end up being the number one pick in the draft. Do you think he envisioned going to Gonzaga, playing his first big game against Texas, playing 9 minutes and scoring 2 points? I know they won. He knows they won. He understands that was a win, but how is he supposed to feel good? And I think allowing him to see it for what it really is, like we mentioned earlier, next play, next game, him bouncing back. And I think that you'll see him bounce back.
They have more marquee games on the docket. Do you feel that Gonzaga, and I don't have it off the top of my head, I know they have UCLA coming up in Vegas, I believe Duke in Vegas, and I'm not sure after that how many marquee. Can anybody beat them with how good Timme is in November? Like when you have a guy that good in November and you have to deal with a guy that's that good in November, he single-handedly can do what he did to Texas, beat him by himself.
One thing that's different for Gonzaga this year is this is the youngest team they've had in some time.
Mm-hmm.
They have two returning starters, right? And it just so happens that the point guard, right, and Drew Timme,
he's great.
Those two guys are really, really good, right? So you have those two positions covered, but they do have an influx of new players and players in different roles. I don't think they're unbeatable early on. As a matter of fact, if they catch a loss or two, it might be something that helps them grow as a group because they've been winning at such a level the last year and a half. But I would say, to answer your specific question, I believe they're more vulnerable this year than they would have been at any time last year, especially early on. As they get more sustained in their new roles and the new players get used to playing in a system and Chet Holmgren continues to develop, I think Gonzaga will be their best late in the year, not early this year.
You watch the Texas game, you're getting ready to play him. You're obviously saying, what are we going to do? Can you trap him with the way that they play?
No.
Impossible.
If you trap him, if I knew you were trapping and you want to ever bet on a college basketball game, if you ever know they're going to trap the post, bet on Gonzaga. They're done. They will get blown out of any arena. Impossible.
What makes them so hard to trap?
They play at a breakneck speed. A lot of the baskets they score are happening at a fast pace coming at your defense. They have not only good movement, but when he catches it, let's start with him. He's a very good passer. As good of a passer as Sabonis was for Gonzaga, I think you're going to look at Drew Timme, and if you talk to their coaching staff, they would tell you he's about as good of a passer as Sabonis. And they're players that he's throwing the ball to. Like, Arch, there's some guys, that are self-checked.
Yeah.
We played with them, or I don't think I was ever self-checked as a player. You coach guys that are self-checked. You hate to talk about it, but you're trying to hide them. You're trying to dive them. You're trying to get them away from any way that they could, tell on themselves that they can't score if no one's in the gym. There's nobody that takes the court for Gonzaga that's not a threat. So all five guys are a threat. He's a very good passer, and they're built to take away the post trap. If you post trap them, you're done. And if someone proves me wrong, I would love to see.
It'll be interesting to see. I know, Mick has trapped the post in the past. I don't necessarily know if that's the way you're going to go moving forward, but it'll be interesting to see how they do it. But Gonzaga has got a big one coming up here at the end of the week, Thanksgiving week. And obviously Duke is on the horizon as well. I like the WCC though. I think BYU has put everyone on notice. San Francisco is 4-0 right now. Santa Clara's got a win against Stanford and Nevada.
St. Mary's.
And St. Mary's is getting ready to head undefeated to Maui. They have a multiple bid league this year.
No doubt. Again, the other game, and we talked a little bit about on another podcast that we were on, is what BYU did to Oregon. Don't take that lightly. Not many teams are able to beat Oregon and Dana Altman like that. They beat them on defense. They beat them on offense. They might have caught Oregon at a good time. Kind of to my point, sometimes a loss or something bad can really spur your team's growth. I think that game against Brigham Young, Oregon will call upon throughout the year. And trust me, their practices are tougher. Everybody's more alert. And as they now go to Vegas to play in the Maui Invitational, I think they'll be more prepared for success there than they would have been if they didn't play BYU at all. And credit BYU. Alex Barcelo has emerged as one of the best guards in the game. And Mark Pope and the way they play. They're an old team. They're a good team. And I think they're an improved defensive team. They've always been good on offense, but as they're better on defense, I think BYU is a real threat as well.
They're good. I'm looking forward to watching some games in the Maui event. I think Houston is going to win that event, and I wouldn't be surprised if Houston's not playing Oregon for all the marbles there at the end of the week. So moving on here.
Andrew Nemhard from Gonzaga.
Great point.
I was talking about point guard.
His brother's good too.
But Andrew, like his age, his experience leaving Florida to go to Gonzaga, he's in now, I believe, his 4th year as a player.
Yeah, he played right away last year. I think they got him eligible.
I mean, he was terrific a year ago. Again, although they only returned 2 starters, Gonzaga, those are 2 key cogs in the wheel, Andrew Nemhard and Drew Timme.
Yeah, Nemhard, he was really impressive. And I think Tiger was really impressive at the end of that Villanova game. They needed somebody to step up there when Villanova had him on the ropes. And Tiger, I think, banged back-to-back threes, took a charge into that row. He's a winner. That'll be a good matchup when they play again. I know that a little different roles this year as they play, but that'll be a good matchup in that game.
I would say this, playing UCLA without Cody Riley, which he did not play against Villanova,
Right.
It is very unfair to judge them as a team. He's a really good player.
Mm-hmm.
He's experienced. He gives them an element of low post scoring. He has the ball at the top of the key in their offense in several sets that they run, and they spread the court, and he gives them a threat. Like sometimes they'll call the dogs off and just throw him the ball in the middle of the lane, throw him the ball on the block consecutively, and he'll score or get fouled. So, having him versus not having him, that's a big deal for UCLA. And I think it says a lot about their team that they could beat Villanova without him.
As we move forward here, let's shift gears and point guard vision. Last week, we talked about point guard vision being the things that guys see ahead, they can see coming that other people can't see. And in our unique way, we brought St. Bonaventure and Mark Schmidt and the Bonnies program to the forefront as being something that a lot of people, if they haven't looked closely, probably don't understand what St. Bonaventure has done. This opportunity this week, we're going to bring another program and coach to the table that's equally as impressive, that has a really good team again this year. And I don't think a lot of people probably understand them, maybe rightfully so because of the league that they're in and with Gonzaga's dominance. But right there every year is St. Mary's, coached by Randy Bennett. And I know you've had a couple games against them. I played them a few years ago at Dayton at UD Arena. We played them. They had a great team with Lawndale and a few of those guys. But he's been doing it for a long time at St. Mary's and has a unique way of doing it. But talk a little bit about the program, Coach Bennett, and why people need to start to take a little bit more notice.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I believe Randy Bennett became St. Mary's coach in 2003. So anytime that a coach, and we talked about it with Mark Schmidt at St. Bonaventure, is at a program, you get around 13, 15 plus 17 years. I mean, you're doing something not right. You're doing something exceptional. But he's been their coach since 2003. He's been to 7 NCAA tournaments. He's coached some great players. Patty Mills was that first name that you remember. Oh, the guard from St. Mary's that's from Australia, right? And that's led him to have a pipeline to Australia, and not just Australia, but just a pipeline in general to getting his types of players. But when you play St. Mary's, their ability to strike you on offense, they are deliberate, but they execute. If you're a young coach trying to search out coaches that run great ball screen action, set plays, flow game, multiple ball screens set on the same possession, you can't watch a better team to execute that than St. Mary's. He's been doing it for a long time. They're also stingy on defense. Yeah. They have a great pride in their man-to-man defense. They're hard to score on. And when you play against them, man, it is a tough game. In 2017, we were playing them in the NCAA tournament. We had Lowry Markkinen and Alonzo Trier, Kadeem Allen. They had Lawndale. They had a very good team. I remember thinking how unfair it was for us to play them. We were a 2 seed in the second round just to get to the Sweet 16, and we won just a hard-fought game, could have lost it. And I'll never forget the feeling after the game was like, we were in the Final Four. I mean, it was such a relief to be able to beat them because it's such a hard game. And there's no bigger compliment you could pay a team, a program, or a head coach than the one I just did. And that is, it was such a hard game, right? For the players, for the staff preparing for the coach. And him and I are good friends. And there is not a guy that gives more to his program than Randy Bennett in terms of recruiting, coaching, trying to improve what they already do well from one season to the next. And this year, he's got a really good team. He's got experience. He's got shooters. They're tough. And I know they play Notre Dame in the first round of the Maui tournament.
That will be a tough game for Notre Dame.
It'll be a tough game. Whoever plays St. Mary's, they'll have the same feeling that I just described, Arch. But he's just an exceptional coach. And we bring him up in point guard vision because does everybody truly know what a great coach he is, what a great program they have, and how long they've sustained excellence? The answer to that, in my opinion, is no. They're playing on the West Coast. They're always the team that has to play Gonzaga, and you see them in that game. But if you follow them closely, they're 4-0 right now. They got an excellent team. I believe they returned to the NCAA tournament this year. And when you play them, they're the team that can advance to the Sweet 16 or beyond. That's how much respect that I have for the team they have this year, and certainly him as a coach.
Just in getting a chance to study them, play them, and watch them, they were ahead of the game early, ball screen offense.
They were.
When you start to talk about the way the game is played now, they were doing that 5, 7, and as long back as probably even a decade ago, of understanding almost the European style of play, maybe because of the way they recruited and studied the game. But early on, they were ahead of the curve in terms of how they ran offense, how they run offense, their philosophy, and being able to play the game within the game in terms of how we can pick on you. And then the second thing that I think is incredible is the way when they have a good post player, how they play off of the post is a whole nother game plan in itself.
Yes. Split screen.
When it's into the post, it's not like you'll see a lot of teams throw the ball into the post and they speed cut dive. Some guys will set the old split on the elbow. That isn't the deal when you play them. When the ball goes into the post, when you play St. Mary's, your offense, your defense literally has to have, how are you defending the split? You got to watch the back cuts. And by the way, the guy with the ball is on an island down there and he can score. Mm-hmm. And I think they have a really unique system offensively in terms of manipulating you. They were ahead of the game with the ball screen. And then the second part of it is there's probably nobody in college basketball as good that when the ball goes into the post, it's a whole nother game plan in itself.
Yeah. So we're good friends with the Van Gundy brothers, Arch. Probably know both guys a little bit better than you do, but you're friends with them as well. And we talk basketball with them. And last year during the pandemic, if there was any gift that we were able to receive as coaches, it almost gave you more time to spend thinking about the game because you weren't allowed to leave your campus and recruit. And for a long period of time, we were just kind of all in our own houses, right? So
Right.
you started
Yeah.
Zooming, and we did several of those basketball talks with Stan and Jeff. And one of the things Jeff talked about, if you remember, is if he would coach again, or like, what would you recommend to a coach right now? And he said it. He said, playing out of the post, like throwing it to your big, your center, and giving him the option to pass, because many times there's no pressure on him, and being creative. The Golden State Warriors do it at a level that's crazy. It's their personnel, but it's also Steve Kerr. He's implemented that in his offense. But if you watch FIBA, if you watch, the USA team play in the Olympics this year, you see that it's being thrown to the post, not for him to score, but for him to create a 3-point shot or hit a cutter for a layup. And St. Mary's does that. So there's two things about them. They play out of the low post as a pass, and they utilize pick and roll basketball as well as any program that's in college basketball, that's for sure. And if you have a chance to watch St. Mary's play, the other thing you see is, like, he said, some really good point guards. But there are also times when he takes a point guard that you wonder if what they do will work with him at the point guard. He's a little bit under the radar. Is he good enough? And you check back, the point guard Ford was like that, from the West. He quietly went from high school to St. Mary's, and you wondered, is he going to be good enough? Can he be a guy like Patty Mills, right? Sure enough, man, he was a first team all conference player. Like, he develops point guards. And one of the reasons they develop is they're in a style that makes them better. And he teaches his guys how to play. Randy Bennett.
From a point guard play, point guard point of view, there's not a better style of play to play in if you're that type of point guard who can handle it, utilizing ball screens, play. They're very good. Unique on defense too. The old peekaboo, hedging under. They uniquely make their team defensively never really rotates. It's a very unique concept. They're a team that plays almost 5 guys on the floor, but the game's really 2-on-2 all the time.
We scrimmaged them every year that I could. Once I figured things out here in the West at Arizona, we scrimmaged them 4 or 5 times. I know this year's Arizona team also scrimmaged them. It's a great scrimmage because you look at those guys down there in layup line, they may not pass the eyeball test, if there is such a thing. But when the jump ball goes up, right away you're in for a heck of a basketball game. Augustus Marcialonis, freshman. Everybody remembers his dad, Sharunas, who played with the Golden State Warriors and was, he was a member of the Olympic team with Sabonis, his father, as well. They played together for the Soviet Union. Unreal player. It's his son. And he's a young freshman that's getting better. As you keep watching St. Mary's play this year, he'll be a point guard of the future for Randy Bennett. He has a way of passing and playing that I think really fits St. Mary's and will make them a very, very good team.
Well, they got a big week ahead, heading to Maui, as you know, trying to get an at-large bid. We were talking about it earlier. These 3 games in 3 days for St. Mary's, there may not be a program that's depending on those 3 games like another program in all of these events. They base their non-conference schedule strategically around some of these opportunities.
Archie, it's that sick moment. You tap your assistant, you tap and look at those. You know what this deal's about? Next 3 days, that thing right there, the scoreboard. It's that scoreboard. Like, did you win or did you lose? And there's a big, big difference for all these guys. So looking forward to watching them for sure.
Sean, as we finish up here, I was thinking about Andre Curbelo and freshman and sophomore, the change in the role. What happened to you your freshman year going into your sophomore year when you had an incident where the game was delayed at one point in time because of you?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. I was actually telling my youngest son that story the other day. So when I was at Pitt, 1987, 88, we were now going 88, 89. So we went from having Charles Smith, Jerome Lane, Demetrius, and, we lost in the NCAA tournament, but we won the Big East.
That was a bad loss.
That was a very bad. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Barry Goheen?
Yeah, Barry Goheen.
Will Purdue?
It's a bad story for another day, but yeah, for sure. But when you became a sophomore next year, like I said, things were harder. But My coach, Paul Evans, had a contract with Pony. And if you bring Pony up these days, young kids would be like, I never heard of it. It looked like a big check mark, and they were the worst shoes. I'm sorry if I offended anyone, but I mean, we talked about it all the time. We had to wear them. It was his contract and whatever. But I got to the point where I felt like they were so bad of a shoe that I needed every advantage I could, quickness wise, to deal with these guys that I was ready to deal with as a young sophomore. So I came up with an idea. I went out, I bought the new Nikes. I mean, I played Georgetown, UConn, Syracuse. They have these nice brand new Nikes. They're jumping out of the gym. And I'm like, part of why they run so well is they wear Nikes and we're wearing these godforsaken, it was like paper plates on your foot, you know? So I bought Nikes. I cut off the swoosh. I didn't tell anybody except one teammate that I had what I was doing. And I painted the little Pony check
Painted it
over the white,
what?
like a legit paint.
A paintbrush?
And it was blue. Yeah. So whatever color my ponies were, I made this shoe.
You took a
look
paintbrush.
quick. Yeah. And I took real paint. The problem was I didn't take into consideration the bending of the shoe and the sweat. So as we're playing the game and we're going up and down, the refs stop the game and they're looking and they see this blue glitter all over the court paint. And finally, you know, the guy that I told on my team, he stood up, started laughing, and he points at my shoes. I got reprimanded, man. I had to go back down to the locker room.
During a college game.
Yeah.
They stopped
And, you
the
know,
game
my
because
coach
you
is mad at
painted the
me
shoes.
and he should have been mad at me, but that's a true story. But, you know, these guys these days, they have no idea how good they have it. The shoes they get, the gear, like there's nobody that needs to do that. But I'm here to tell you, if you put Pony shoes on Andrew Nemhart and he had to wear them in the next game, the great point guard of Gonzaga, he would be thinking along the lines that I thought of. You know, I was before my time, I guess. But yeah, and that shows you the pressure of college basketball. That's how I thought for sure.
You were looking for some more grease on the wheels, huh?
Yeah, I got in trouble. I know that was a bad next day at practice for me. Arch, I want to end this podcast though. How about like the big three? You know, when you think back to what we've looked at, you know, the team that really comes to your mind, the player that comes to your mind, and maybe the coach. I know in point guard vision today we highlighted Randy Bennett from St. Mary's. In our last podcast, we highlighted Mark Schmidt from St. Bonaventure. But like this, what really stands out for you? I'll go first in terms of the team. Ed Cooley, Providence College, going to Wisconsin and winning. I mean, when you think of the home courts that are almost impossible to win at, even in Big Ten play,
Kohl Center.
Playing a game in Madison, Wisconsin at the Kohl Center against Wisconsin, it's been a long time that they've lost at home, especially in the non-conference. Providence to be able to this early in the year go to the Kohl Center and beat them, I think one of the highlights of the early season for me.
For me, it's BYU. And I know the Oregon game's fresh on everybody's mind. They opened the season at home with a win, I believe, against Cleveland State. Dennis Gates has a returning team that played in the NCAA tournament. That was their home opener. They play arguably one of the best teams in college basketball in San Diego State in their second game and win a tough one at home. Then they take care of Oregon. I would say today that if the NCAA tournament was going to start, I'm not sure that they're not a 1 seed with that resume. Now they have to keep it going, but BYU is playing for a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament right now. And I'm assuming that their aspirations are to try and knock Gonzaga off to win the WCC here as the year continues to go.
WCC, Santa Clara, St. Mary's,
Nevada.
Gonzaga, BYU.
In Nevada. No, I'm sorry. Nevada's in the Mountain West. Nevada just lost to Santa Clara. But San Francisco's undefeated.
And San Francisco, I'm sorry. Yeah.
They have a good
league.
league.
Yeah, they do. And I think their goal is to emerge their conference as the overall 6th best conference in college basketball. That may not mean a lot to someone if I say that, but like if they position themselves as the 6th best overall conference.
Multiple bid league.
That's right. Then you get the multiple bids to the NCAA tournament, which I think they're well on their way. And like we talked about, November and December games, they're everything towards March Madness, especially for a league like theirs. And I think those coaches know it. That's why these next couple of weeks will be really important for their conference.
Most impressive player so far for you. Let's take Drew Timme out.
I
You're not
can't.
allowed. You're not allowed.
I can't. I can't.
You're not allowed.
I'm going to give credit where credit's due. It's the headband. It's the crazy mustache. It's what he does when he makes a basket. He's unguardable. He is unstoppable. You can't trap him. He doesn't get nearly enough credit for the type of player that he's already been. He's proven it. Arch, he's proven it wire to wire last year on a team that was the best team in the country for most of last year. He was their overall best player. He's doing it again. Again, I want to remind you, against Chris Beard in Texas, he went 15 for 19 from the field and had a nice, easy, quiet 37. There is no other candidate for player of the week at this podcast.
I'm going with Kentucky's Oscar Tshiebwe. Oscar has put some stagger. If Drew Timme would take a timeout and doesn't play for a week, they would start to talk about Oscar, and his numbers are absolutely ridiculous through the early part here. He's played against in the opener Duke, which he had almost a 20-20 game.
Yeah.
He had 20 more rebounds in the second game, and then he went for 24 and 16 in their last one.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 56 rebounds in 3 games.
Crazy.
And to me, he has been as impressive as any player, as just in terms of productivity on what he's bringing to the table for them.
We get Coach Cal on this podcast. I'm going to ask him to compare Oscar to Jerome Lane.
I was wondering about that.
He coached both of them.
Oscar's going to lead college basketball and rebounding. Jerome led college basketball and rebounding. They're different players.
Yeah.
But Jerome had 25 rebounds in the game.
Where we played Fitzgerald Field, also was this balcony where they filmed the game. And at the bottom of the balcony, they kept these Bs. They write a huge B. Every time he got a rebound, they flipped it. And he'd go down the court, Jerome, and go like.
I think he started to tap his own ball.
And then when he started to miss his own shot on purpose to pad his stats, that's when you know. But I'm telling you, my man, he went for about 14 rebounds a game in the old Big East. That's so old Big East. Let me just give you a couple names he played against. When he played Syracuse, he had Ronnie Cycli and Derek Coleman in there.
Georgetown.
Right? When he had Seton Hall, he had
Bryant.
Mark Bryant and Ramon Ramos in there. You know, there's some men, and when I tell you he got 14 a game. But to your point on Oscar, if you're bringing that to the table, I mean, the value you're bringing to your team, you're an All-American. You're doing things that haven't been done in college basketball prior to you doing it. So that's a good one. And look, the coach that stands out for me, we've already talked about him, is Kevin Willard. Not just because of the early success he's having this season, but just what he's done, you know, as he's left Iona and taken over the Seton Hall job, rebuild it. He's having continued success. His team has an edge to them. They remind me of those teams back in the day in the Big East. Like, you play Seton Hall right now, you know, they will knock you on your ass. You better be ready to play.
I would say, just standing out, I think Mike White's done an incredible job at Florida last year.
In a quiet way,
in a quiet way. You coming in after, you know, obviously Billy Donovan, the great Billy Donovan. But he's been, I think, to 6 out of the last 7 or 6 in a row, however many tournaments in a row it's been the NCAA tournament. It's been to an Elite 8. Last year's team went through an unprecedented, unthinkable situation when one of the SEC player of the year goes down in front of national television with a medical issue. His entire team has to be able to deal with that. His staff has to be able to deal with that. They still made the tournament last year after they lost the SEC Player of the Year. And then as they've started this year, he's replaced the entire starting 5.
Yeah.
And he's got a new starting 5. And they had a big win at home against Florida State. And they put Florida State's wear and tear on you. The 9-10 guys, they wear you down and eventually they tear you apart to the point. Florida wore Florida State out in Gainesville this past weekend with their defense. They are quick. They are athletic. And I think that Mike's going to have a really, really good team this year as they continue to progress.
Yeah. Well, that's it, Arch. You know, one thing that popped in before we close it up this week is think about the ballrooms at these hotels over the next couple of weeks, what's going to take place. You know, like, I think the fans sometimes don't understand that when the game ends, like your guys go back and they lay down in their rooms, they watch TV, they get something to eat, but you have to have all these different meetings and you have to go somewhere as a staff. So you utilize your hotel facility, the ballrooms, it's kind of like a pseudo practice court, right? And you go through the next game, because what we just talked about it, whether you win or lose the first game in these tournaments, that next game sometimes is on you. I remember playing a late night game in Maui against Wisconsin, losing it, and then having, I think, the 12 noon game the next day against Colorado.
Yeah.
And it's like, you think about that. How do you prepare for that game? You get in these ballrooms and get your guys going. And sometimes you're like, come on, pick it up, and hey, wear your shoes, no flip-flops. I mean, but we were telling Jeff Van Gundy that story, right?
I don't think I've ever laughed as hard when we talked about, how to utilize the ballroom for your advantage.
He's talking about, I was saying, I started to name these events at a ballroom at Arizona. I would call them rug burns. Like, if we do it right, you're wearing your shoes, like you should feel the heat off the rug coming, like, come on, cut. Even your managers that are your dummy offense or whatever you're doing.
To hydrate after.
You got to get them to cut hard, and you're on them too. So he goes, that sounds good. He goes, it reminds me of that time I was coaching in Houston and we tried that, have our own rug burn in the NBA. And guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. And he said, Steve Francis threw a pass so high that it hit the chandelier and it shattered.
He accidentally shattered a $25,000 chandelier.
He walked out and said, rug burn over, fellas. See you at the game. He did. He said the chandelier cost like.
So they had to pay for the chandelier. It was $20,000 chandelier.
Nice job, coach. So wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy feast week here. Happy Thanksgiving. We'll be back next week with our first guest, and we're looking forward to bringing a little different flavor to the podcast.